Back on March 11th of 1995, 30 years ago, one of the greatest RPGs of all time was released on the Super Nintendo. Chrono Trigger was the result of collaboration from some heavyweights in their respective industry coming together, and therefore, it would go on to garner critical praise from publications and gamers all around the world. It is regarded as one of the best RPGs of all time, hands down. So back then, after I had finished the game, I was expecting maybe a sequel to come out a year or two afterwards, specifically on the new Ultra 64 system that Nintendo was working on. Ooh, that was a big one. Especially with the ending that I got, which shows Chrono's mom chasing the family cat into a time portal and the gang going after her. It was the perfect ending as far as I'm concerned. I knew about the other endings, but I didn't need to see them. This one right here was perfect. So what new crazy adventures would the gang get into? And so I waited. And I waited a little bit more. Japanese gamers, however, did get a sequel to it, one that we would only learn about here in the States after its release, Radical Dreamers. This title will be released in February of 1996 through the Stellaview service on the Super Famicom. Unlike Chrono Trigger though, this title will be presented to the gamer as a visual novel, and it was not a true sequel to Chrono Trigger, but rather a spin-off, with some slight references to the characters from the original title. Think of this game like a digital version of a choose-your-own-adventure book. It would remain exclusive to the Stellaview until a ROM hacking group called Demiforce translated the game for the Western audience in 2003. Masato Kato felt that the ending of Chrono Trigger left business unfinished and wanted to write a story that properly explained and resolved all the loose ends from it. I'm sorry, unfinished? The game has 13 endings. What was the full version here, Kato-san? 78 endings? And so Radical Dreamers was followed up by Chrono Cross in 1999 for the PS1. Writer Masato Kato wanted to focus outside the time travel gimmick and tackle this entry into the Chrono series using a different angle. This game would touch upon the premise of Radical Dreamers and brought back a few characters from Chrono Trigger. So I'm going to delve into their storylines and how each game does or doesn't fully connect to another, as well as important plot points. I will not be nitpicking the time stream and event paradoxes or possible plot holes. I will be just concentrating on the main storyline and how it is presented in the game and how the characters carry over from one title to another. I will be posting timestamps on the screen to show when you can skip to the next game in case you don't want to hear spoilers or just want to skip to the next part of the video. Again, be prepared for major spoilers ahead and grab some Excedrin or Tylenol or whatever you like, because the storyline for Chrono Cross alone is enough to give a theoretical physicist a headache. First up, Chrono Trigger. Let's skip the entire first portion of the game since it is mostly there just to introduce the characters, and let's fast forward ahead to where the story starts to really open up. First, just a little bit of background. So the main villain in Chrono Trigger is Lavos, a creature who crashes into Earth in 65 million BC and manages to bury its way into the core of the planet, where it rests as it siphons energy from the planet. A few millennia later, two species become dominant across the world: humans and reptiles, which evolved from regular reptiles. This is gonna come back to affect the overall story, so remember that. The energy of Lavos was able to be used by certain humans as magic. These so-called magic users would ultimately band together and label themselves the Enlightened Ones, who go on to create their own kingdom and use their newfound knowledge to lift it above the clouds. This kingdom was called Zeal. The Queen, also called Seal, wanted to harness even more power from Lavos and created a device called the Mammon Machine. To accomplish this with the help of her advisors called Melchior, Balthasar, and Gaspar. But the Queen loses her sanity and grows more power hungry the more power the machine collects. This is something that her two children, Shala and Janus, notice as time goes by. And so she orders the creation of the Ocean Palace, which rests underneath the ocean in order to be closer to Lavos and siphon more energy using this Mammon Machine. The Queen uses Shala to control the Mammon Machine to some extent with the help of her blue necklace pendant. Lavos eventually is too powerful to handle once awakened, even by the Queen or Shala, In the course of this happening, the three gurus and Janus get scattered into different time portals by Lavos. All these events occur in the original timeline story, the same ones that we as the player are introduced into when we start the game. I'm gonna get into that as the video goes on. Janus is transported to 600 AD. There he is almost killed by imps, but when he defeats them in battle, Ozzy, a being that is a mystic, raises him and becomes their leader as the Magus. Balthasar is transported to the future to 2300 AD, where he starts working on a machine called the Epoch, but dies before it is finished. But he does manage to transfer his memories into a new, this guy right here. If you are wondering why he builds a time machine, this is going to be explored a little bit more in Chrono Cross. By the way, on a small little tangent here, Nu would get a major role on a completely original OVA for Chrono Trigger that was released in 1996 and was never released commercially. Not many fans of Chrono Trigger know of its existence, so if you haven't watched the 60-minute promo anime, I highly recommend you do so. It is a fast-paced, insanity-filled slapstick story on your senses, and it is hilarious. Go watch it. Melchior ends up in 1000 AD, where the game begins. He is a weaponsmith and helps the party in reforging the sword Masamune, is that how you pronounce it? Which is needed to confront Magus. Gaspar ends up at the end of time, where you'd meet him once you enter a portal with 3 friends. He's the one that gives you the Chrono Trigger, which helps you in reviving Chrono, if you choose to do so. In the future, when Chrono and friends find out that Lavos caused the fall of humanity, they also find out that Lavos was first awoken back in 600 AD by someone called Magus. Since Chrono and gang defeat the Magus and disrupt the spell to revive Lavos, this causes some sort of an energy displacement that causes a portal to emerge, causing Chrono, his party, and Magus to be sucked in. Now this is where everything starts to really go batshit crazy. Chrono and party get sent back to the prehistoric times where they had traveled earlier. Magus gets sent back to 12,000 BC, more specifically Seal, and is able to serve the queen since he is basically reliving his life again and is therefore able to predict events accurately. He awaits for Lavos to be awakened to get revenge on him. You gotta give it to Magus, the man is persistent. So in the original time stream, Shala and the queen disappear when Lavos emerges and destroys Seal. In that instance, it would appear that Shala is somehow able to teleport herself away and survives, which might explain how her pendant eventually ended up with Marley. Not sure what happened to the queen in that time stream though. But once Chrono and friends arrive to Zeal after Magus arrives as the prophet, this changes events. Actually, Magus arriving there alone changes everything, but I will leave it at that. Chrono and party disrupt the queen's attempt to fully awaken Lavos, and in the ensuing battle to contain Lavos, Chrono dies. Zeal, however, is still destroyed, but 2 events change here. Shala ends up teleporting the survivors away to safety versus saving herself. Now you might wonder, why does this matter? 2 reasons. The queen somehow survives this time around, leading to her raising the ocean palace into the sky in what becomes the Black Omen. Second reason is Shala. Because she used her last amounts of magic to teleport your party away from Zeal, she most likely can't escape herself, and this alone leads to huge ramifications for the overall Chrono series storyline. Now this brings us to Radical Dreamers. In this spin-off from the Chrono Trigger storyline, we see 3 individuals attempting to break into a huge mansion called Viper Manor. These 3 call themselves the Radical Dreamers. Within this mansion resides Lynx, a powerful aristocrat who acquired the mansion after he double-crossed someone called General Viper and his army of dragoons and took possession of the Frozen Flame. This object is considered to be capable of granting wishes. But one of the members of the Radical Dreamers has other reasons for infiltrating the mansion. The 3 characters here are Kid, a young female and leader of the group, Surge, a young boy and the narrator of the game from whose point of view you see the game's events unfold, and Gil, a mysterious masked stranger who can seemingly blend into and out of shadows. He looks familiar. As your party gets deeper into the mansion, they battle different enemies and learn more about the Frozen Flame, which is revealed by Gil to be a piece of lavos that broke off when it crash landed on Earth millions of years ago. The party would eventually end up in the abandoned ruins of Seal underneath the mansion. Yep, that same Seal. It is here that they finally run into Lynx and battle him for the Frozen Flame. Surge comes to find out that Luca had opened up an orphanage after the events of Chrono Trigger, and that Kid had been raised by Luca in that same orphanage. However, Lynx killed Luca as he was in pursuit of the Chrono Trigger, which when combined with the Frozen Flame, could alter history and grant immense power, and then proceeded to burn the orphanage down. Kid survived this and wanted to kill Lynx, but Gil intervened and took her under his care, traveling with her from that point forward. During the fight, Kid is wounded, and out of her pocket she pulls out that same Chrono Trigger, one of the two that Luca had been working on, and it shatters, sending Kid and Surge into a time vortex. Surge is able to see his life and that of all other realities, but Kid sees her past and comes to realize that she is a reincarnation of Shala. At the time of the collapse of Zeal, Shala cried out in anguish and fear of the possibility of being engulfed by the darkness. The Frozen Flame at the Ocean Palace heard her cries and changed her into a baby and sent her through time into the modern era, where Luca found her in the forest. The trio separate as Kid and Gil, who we all know by now is Magus, we gotta be stupid otherwise, escape a raid party sent by a neighboring kingdom and leave Surge behind in the forest so he isn't arrested if caught alone. Lynx also escapes during that raid. The Radical Dreamers break up and the story ends with Kid and Gil continuing on their adventures without Surge. Many of the concepts that are brought up in this game will be visited again in Chrono Cross. Okay, hold on, before we start, let me get some Excedrin. Okay, here we go. So first and most importantly, the entire Radical Dreamer storyline, it was interesting and would be somewhat retconned by Chrono Cross. Not entirely, but it depicts its events as taking place in an alternate timeline. That said, let me start, but before I do so, let me just grab another Excedrin. The game starts with a dream sequence of you and two other characters breaking into a huge white-looking fortress and eventually making your way to the top, where an FMV sequence shows a kid holding a knife with blood on it and a girl on the floor face down before the dream ends. You wake up as Surge, a young kid living in an archipelago setting called El Nido. It is comprised of many islands, some of which were created to house dragons and were artificially created, which I will go over as the video goes on. You eventually make your way to the beach, where you hear someone say your name several times before you somehow slip into a different dimension, where you come to find out that you died 10 years earlier. You eventually meet Kid, a thief from the Radical Dreamers who is in search of the Frozen Flame. Sounds familiar? Good, that means you're paying attention. Surge and Kid in this different dimension team up and confront Lynx, but Kid is poisoned during the encounter and the group escapes without the flame. She eventually recuperates and joins Surge in traveling to Fort Dragonia, where they confront Lynx again, only this is exactly what Lynx wanted. Now this is where the story starts to really go off the rails. Link uses an item called the Dragon Tear to switch bodies with Surge, and during the confusion, Lynx, now in Surge's body, stabs Kid and transports Surge, which is in Link's body now, to a temporal vortex, where Harley, a character I will get into more later in this video, saves you and helps you escape. I'm gonna explain why Link switches bodies with Surge soon. You end up stuck back in your original dimension, but as Lynx, and you learn from your mom that 14 years ago, you, your father, Wasuki, and his friend Miguel set out to the sea to travel to Marbul, in search of a cure for Surge after he was poisoned by a panther demon. But they were caught in a very powerful storm where Miguel goes missing, but Surge and his father make it back. But whatever happened out there changed Surge's father. No more details are given at that point. You travel to the location of Chronopolis, where Lynx was headed, in the hopes of getting your body back and finding out about the dimensional split and hopefully finding a way to cross dimensions again. Instead, you find Miguel and you learn about fate, which is only explained at that time as something that holds control of your life and choices, but leaves it at that. He also mentions an event that caused the Sea of Eden to change to the Dead Sea. Within this frozen abandoned ruin is the Frozen Flame. However, in order to keep the Frozen Flame on Homeworld from being captured by Surge, fate destroys the entire Dead Sea, but your party is saved by one of the 6 dragons at the last minute. Surge finds out that he needs to collect all the relics from the dragons across both worlds and travels back to Fort Dragonia, where Lynx had swapped bodies with him earlier in the game. He confronts Lynx there again and finds the dragon tear, but instead of allowing him to swap back into his body, it melts away Lynx's body and reincarnates Surge's new body, grown from fetus all the way to a young adult. Let me grab another Excedrin. Surge travels to the Sea of Eden to investigate the ruins since the Dead Sea one was destroyed by fate on Homeworld. Yeah, I forgot to mention, so there are 2 worlds in this game. Homeworld and Alternate World. Homeworld is where you start the game at, Alternate World being the one that you are sucked into. Once there, more revelations come to light. When Surge's father and Miguel set out in the storm, they were taken off course and ended up at the Temple of the Sea of Eden, known as Chronopolis. But once they reached the ruins, the immense energy emitted from the Fate supercomputer housed there drove Surge's father insane, yet cured Surge once he came into contact with the Frozen Flame. This was made possible by the same storm that had knocked them off course, since it took down the facility's defense system, allowing Surge to get anywhere near the flame, much less touch it. Because Surge touches the Frozen Flame, he becomes the Arbiter, meaning that he is the only one allowed access to it, locking the Fate supercomputer out. This feature was built into the system as a fail-safe option in case Fate ever ran amok. The name of the circuit that made this possible was called the Prometheus circuit, and it was built by Luca. This circuit was built from the parts of Robo from Chrono Trigger, so basically the Prometheus circuit is Robo. They managed to escape the ruins as the defense system came back up, but Miguel is left behind and remains there for the next 4 years. The storm was also a window of opportunity for the Dragon God to make its move to counter Fate and bring a new player into the game. They create Harley, who can go undetected by Fate as she works with the intention to get her hands on the Frozen Flame. She is basically a double agent for the dragons. Once deep inside Chronopolis, Surge finds Lynx and Kid in proximity of the Frozen Flame. Lynx, still in Surge's body, merges with Fate, the supercomputer, and attacks Surge and his party, but they manage to defeat it, and in the process, the Chronopolis defense system goes down. Harley meets up with Surge and party and explains that she must join with the other dragons, knowing she must fulfill her destiny and fight Surge for the flame. Harley, turns out, is not only a double agent, but the 7th dragon known as the Dark Moon Dragon. All of the dragons merge into one mega dragon called the Dragon God, and take the Frozen Flame from Fate and uses it to raise Terra Tower from the bottom of the ocean after thousands of years. Gonna explain this tower a little bit more, as well as the dragons and their history. Surge and his group then infiltrate Terra Tower in order to get the Frozen Flame back from the Dragon God before it is used to wipe out humanity. It is in this tower that Balthazar from Chrono Trigger, you meet him in a portion of the tower that resembles Viper Manor, same Viper Manor mentioned in Radical Dreamers. This is where everything is explained to some degree on what has caused all these events to take place. Pay attention, because it gets even more crazy from here. Hard to believe, right? Back in Chrono Trigger, we learned that Lavos crash landed on Earth. This starts to set everything in motion. When Lavos burrows into the planet to feed off its source, it also alters the evolution of Homo sapiens. Up to that point where Lavos crashed, it was the reptiles who had been the dominant species of the planet. But there is another timeline where Lavos did not crash into the planet, and this timeline also plays an important role in Chrono Cross. First, let's tackle the timeline where Lavos does crash into the planet, also known as the Keystone Dimension. This is where Chrono Trigger takes place. Shala is absorbed by a time vortex into a place called the Darkness Beyond Time. But so was Lavos after it was defeated by Chrono and his party. Now this is where Lavos merges with Shala to create the entity known as the Time Devourer. This event causes Shala's mind to splinter into two, one harboring pure hatred for the human race and the planet, and the other side wanting the opposite. While still merging with Lavos, she hears out a cry for help throughout time. She also clones herself before the merger took full effect, and sent that baby clone version of herself to a future time, where Luca found her and adopted her and raised her in her orphanage. The cries for help Shala heard would turn out to be Surge from Chrono Cross. In her attempt to contact Surge in that time period, she created a huge magnetic storm that caused Surge's father and friend Miguel to wander into the Sea of Eden and eventually Chronopolis. But it would also lead to the emergence of Lynx. The Fate supercomputer saw how it was locked out and immediately sought out a solution. Why it chose Surge's father over him, it's still a mystery to me. Fate somehow managed to integrate itself into his DNA, eventually becoming a human version of itself, and slowly morphing his appearance to that of a cat-like humanoid to feed off the fear Surge had from that panther-like demon who attacked him at the beach and poisoned him. Fate, the supercomputer, thought that if he could kill Surge, then his death would automatically disable the lockout from the frozen flame. When Lynx does kill Surge by drowning him, it does not break the seal, so Fate has to find another way. The reason why it doesn't work, I think, is because Kid manages to save Surge from being drowned in the other dimension. We have already seen the flame have a connection with Lavos in the past, so it isn't a far reach to think that the flame would detect Surge's life force across the other dimension. I told you the story would get crazy, and I'm not even finished. Fate, meanwhile, found another way to get to the flame and instructs Lynx to go after Luca so that she may disable the Prometheus circuit. So Lynx kidnaps Luca and kills her after she refuses to disable it, which keeps Fate from accessing the frozen flame, and then proceeds to burn down the orphanage with help from Harley. Kid survives this event, which causes her to become a raider and part of the Radical Dreamers. However, all of these events had been foreseen and plans were put into effect to not only aid Surge, but to free Shala from her dark prison and separate her from Lavos so that the Time Devourer would not destroy the universe and all the timelines. In Chrono Trigger, when Balthazar got sent into the future, it was the future where Lavos destroys civilization. This is the future that we see play out in that game. But when Lavos is defeated by Chrono and company, that future is changed. Civilization is no longer destroyed and Balthazar is therefore able to continue his research with time. He eventually asks to fund a research facility that would study time more effectively and places this facility in what would become El Nido, the place where Chrono Cross takes place, due to the strong energy signals emanating from that location. This is where the frozen flame was found and would be used to power this new research facility. In order to control this new research facility, Balthazar integrated the facility system into the existing one from Mother Brain, which you meet in the apocalyptic future, and it was in charge of linking all the domes to one another and controlling the robots that resided in them. This newly built facility became known as Chronopolis in Chrono Cross. With the help of Fate and the systems of Chronopolis, Balthazar learns the fate of Shala and Lavos, and begins to put a plan into effect that will help in separating the two and prevent the Time Devourer from destroying existence. Balthazar also creates the Neo Epoch, his time machine, which he would use to confirm that his plan proceeds accordingly. He calls his plan Operation Kid. Well, that's a stupid name. He then leaves the facility to travel to modern times, leaving the research facility crew and supervisor to conduct what would become known as the Counter Time Experiment in an effort to better understand time and used the power of the flame and the immense computational capabilities of Fate to travel back in time right before the destruction of Zeal, rescuing Shala and preventing her from merging with Lavos. And so the experiment is carried out.
I haven't reviewed, we only just found out we're there, review it.
And as you can guess, the experiment doesn't go as planned.
What just happened?
This leads to what is known as a time crash. This experiment causes the entire Chronopolis facility to be flung into the past around 12,000 BC. This was also partly due to Lavos using the frozen flame housed within Chronopolis in the hopes of throwing off the balance of the planet as he awoke during the Palace of Zeal incident. If you all need like an extra minute or two to grab some Excedrin or something else for the headache, go ahead. I understand. When the experiment accessed the flame, at that moment Lavos sensed it through time since it is a piece of him, and that is what caused the time crash to occur. Now remember how I mentioned earlier about the reptiles and how they were the dominant species on the planet prior to Lavos' arrival? I haven't forgotten them. Well, it turns out that the reptiles did thrive in an alternate timeline where Lavos never arrived on the planet. In this timeline, they will go on to create a thriving society and civilization that is more in tune with the planet and its energies. They continue to evolve their technologies and themselves over millions of years, eventually becoming Dragonians. During this time, they created vast cities and a prospering society, but their greatest achievement was the creation of Dinopolis, which was a floating city that housed an internal system called the Dragon God, which helped in controlling all of nature across the planet. Dinopolis is basically the equivalent of Fate. When Lavos somehow drags Chronopolis back in time to Zeal, the planet counters this by snatching Dinopolis from its timeline and brings it into the Keystone Dimension alongside Chronopolis. Eventually the two fight for supremacy, with Chronopolis ultimately winning the war, then gutting Dinopolis and capturing the Dragon God. Fate, through many centuries, terraforms the Sea of Eden by creating islands within a secluded biosphere, populates it with personnel from the facility, with their minds completely wiped before they are placed across the island. Their lives are closely monitored and controlled by Fate and are prevented from making contact with the outside world for the next few thousand years. Fate then separated the Dragon God into 6 dragons to weaken it and scattered them across El Nido to keep them from reforming and rising up as a threat to not only Fate, but humanity. Now Fate wanted full control of this paradise in order to not disturb predicted future events anticipated. When Link's kill surged, it did not break the connection to the flame, so Fate came up with another scenario. It would find a way to switch bodies with him and take control of the frozen flame again. But in the dimension we play through, Surge is saved from drowning by Kid, creating a dimensional split. Fate saw this as a perfect opportunity as they had predicted this event. But why did Kid save Surge at that moment? Was it Fate? Nope. Project Kid. Balthazar knew Lynx would kill Surge in the alternate dimension and send Kid through time to prevent this in the homeworld dimension, knowing that this would prevent Fate from accessing the flame after Lynx kills Surge in the other dimension. Oh man, I'm running out of Excedrin. Let's go back to the game's storyline now. Surge and party managed to ascend the Terra Tower and fight the Dragon God. Once defeated, the Terra Tower falls to the sea and goes through some kind of a transformation, and Surge gets access to the Chrono Cross by combining the Dragon Tears of Hate and Love. This is actually optional and is not needed to win the game, but it is if you want the best ending. First, however, they must battle and destroy the Time Devourer. Surge uses one of the time eggs created by Luca to enter the darkness beyond time, where the party defeats the Devourer with the help of the Chrono Cross element. This right here sets Shala free. The dimensions merge into one, and Surge finds himself back on the beach where the game had started, seemingly with no recollections of his adventures. So in the end, it all came down to this. The planet, which is sometimes referred to in the series as the Entity, versus Lavos. When Lavos crashed into the planet, it altered the evolution of humans, where the reptiles had been the dominant of the two races. When the humans started to convert Lavos' energies into magic, the planet saw this as human beings categorized as foreign, like Lavos, since they were no longer evolving organically. When Lavos summoned Chronopolis into the past as it awoke in zeal, the planet countered this by bringing Dinopolis from the alternate timeline to balance the scales. Fate wanted to keep access to the flame to aid the human race, but did so with malicious intent. The dragon god wanted to reclaim the flame to extinguish the same humans that had enslaved and splintered its power. So they created Harley in order to infiltrate Fate and grab the flame if Fate ever succeeded with its plan by partnering up with Lynx and secretly guiding his actions for the sake of the dragons. They also helped Surge in order to empower him with the ability to get the flame so that they might steal it from him when the time was right. But Balthazar was pulling the strings all along with Project Kid, wanting to keep Fate from regaining access to the frozen flame, even though Fate was technically on our side. Yet his goal went beyond the planet and humanity, wanting to free Shala so that the Time Devourer would not destroy all existence. So in some ways, Surge was a pawn for all three parties wanting to get the flame. Balthazar, the dragons, and even Fate to some extent. So many different parties all wanting the flame for different reasons is what makes this story not only confusing, but interesting at the same time, with so many paths diverging to other plot points. Throw in 45 different characters with 12 different endings, only 2 of which are available through the first playthrough and the remaining 10 opened up when you start a Game Plus option, and you have one of the most ambitious storylines possibly ever to grace any sort of media, much less video games. I think the reason Chrono Cross did not make the same splash as Chrono Trigger was that the game deviated too much from the original. Gone was most of the team from Trigger, with only Masato Kato and composer Yasunori Mitsuda returning from the original core group. The artwork and the overall character designs are vastly different from what we saw in Trigger, with that overall Toriyama feel to it being gone. Chrono Cross makes me feel like I am playing inside a Florida vacation snow globe. Not sure if others out there feel like the game went in a little too hard with the very colorful looking world. On top of that, the game was released in between Final Fantasy VIII and IX. Pretty sure that cannibalized its overall sales. Naming it Chrono Cross I think helped and at the same time hindered its success. People leaned on it because it was a sequel to Trigger, but at the same time it was criticized for going too off the rails with the characters and the overall story. Had it been called something else and completely made to work as a standalone title, might have helped it, but that's something we'll never know. The game still accumulated a ton of praise from the video game world. It got a perfect 10 in GameSpot, a very special award when considering only a very few list of games throughout the years would achieve a perfect score of 10 on their website. Even though I do not like Chrono Cross, I have to give major props to Kato-san and the overall team for trying something new, not only visually, but for the story as well. Is it confusing? Hell yes. Does it feel overly ambitious to the point that it feels like the writers were deliberately creating a story that would confuse a large percentage of their target audience? It seems that way to me. But by creating a new angle to an existing storyline that dealt with time travel initially, and then pivoted into multi-dimensional travel and introduced a huge cast of characters, Chrono Cross has cemented itself as a breathtaking and very unique title that almost has no peer to it, even among today's vast digital gaming library. It is one of those great games that is very polarized even today. Hopefully this video explained the extremely convoluted storyline of the Chrono series to a point where it makes a little more sense. If not, you know what, I apologize. I really try to be as accurate as possible, but I am sure I have messed up somewhere with a couple of details here and there. This script alone took me over 3 weeks to complete, and for the first time in over 100 videos that I have made, I had to color highlight different portions of my script to separate different topics to keep myself from getting confused. And I still got confused. And I'm still confused as I'm finishing this video. However, if you want to get into the overall story in even more detail, I highly recommend the Chrono Wiki, which is what I used for the majority of my notes, plus Reddit. Lots of Reddit. I went through a lot of Reddit feedback from the Chrono community. There was lots of details that I skipped as well for the sake of time and overall simplicity. Now, what are your thoughts on the Chrono series in general, or any specific title in the series? I still regard Chrono Trigger to be my favorite game of all time, and revisiting it for this video brought back many memories that remind me time and again why this game holds such a special place in the hearts of gamers out there. Should there be a new Chrono game, or was Chrono Cross the perfect ending? Share with us all, and until next video, keep watching and keep gaming.